The following presentation was recorded live for the International Association of Square Dance Callers' 33rd Annual Convention. We take you live to the Renaissance Suites Hotel in Charlotte, North Carolina, where our session is just getting underway.
Okay, good afternoon. It is now 3:30 on Monday of CALLERLAB. This is the session of Calling for Youth. I'm the moderator, Tom Miller. I am basically the referee between these two to the right of me and one to the left of me. On the panel today will be Kristy Jacobs, and to the left of me will be Bob Briggs. Basically what we're going to be doing with this panel is just kind of giving you some ideas about calling to youth, what you should expect, what you may get out of it. How do you handle yourself as you're calling for the youth? It's completely different than calling for an adult group per se. I'm going to start right in by, Bob, I don't have my glasses on, so I'm going to introduce Bob Briggs, and he can tell you his program. Let me say before we go any further, up to this morning, Kristy and I was doing this session on youth, and we kind of cornered Bob and says, since you're not doing anything at 3:30, you're going to help us with this panel. So we appreciate Bob stepping up to the plate, and I tell you how good he is. He has handouts and everything for you, so since this morning. So, but anyway, give a nice hand to Mr. Bob Briggs.
Thank you. Those of you who were here last year, you might recognize the part of the handout because I did take last year's handout and resurrect it. And there are a few copies up here that they made for me. For those of you, how many were here last year? Okay, so we do have quite a number of new faces. For those of you, I've been calling since 1975. I started out as a college student, or I should say a just past college student who was invited to come dance and then was pressed into service as a caller. And so I started calling in my early 20s. So that's my background. The last 6 years up until recently, I was calling for the Colorado Rocky Mountain Dancers, which is a performance team. And they aren't that good, guys. Oh, okay. Somebody take Yona one. All right. So as a caller, I feel better standing up than sitting down, so I thought I might just do that. One of the things that I thought about since this morning, and actually Kristy and I were having some conversations about, was some of the nature about when we call for youth, we have to identify what part of youth we mean. And if you're calling for the, let me say something like under 15s, which really means 15 down to 8, and that line is very muddy at the bottom. You're talking about a group of kids that can dance together and will dance one way. When you're talking about 15 to 21, you're talking about a slightly different group. And when you're talking about the 20s through 30s, you're talking about a different group. And I bring that up because I recently started, I guess you could say, some people would say a club or a new dance series. I'm trying to form a Generation Y group in Denver, and I'm almost at 2 squares of dancers. And in forming that, we have a fairly large number of the younger 20-somethings and a few of the late teen-somethings in this group. The recruiting of that group is a very interesting process. It's all friend-based. you could advertise until you spent all the money in the world and you would not get these kids, these young people, because they're not going to respond to that under the current environment, unless we could get it on like a TV show, or a movie, or which is drawing people out of the woodwork into the ballroom arena. If we could get it to there, then we would have a different kind of avenue. It's not, and Kristy and I were talking about, how do we make this cool? We haven't figured that out. Kristy and I think we'll have to talk about that. If anybody has any ideas on how to make, Tom, make this cool, let's touch on that, because I think that's really an important thing, because we need to make it cool. What we need to make a clear understanding of when we're calling for youth, you're going to call differently when you're calling for each of those three groups. And it's really two groups with a muddy middle is the way I would portray it in the way I'm thinking of it now. If you're calling for youth, one of the things that you're going to find is that, number one, you can't teach them like you teach adults. Since I was here last year, I taught 2 classes, 0 to mainstream, in 10 hours on a Saturday and a Sunday. I was a basket case. They were pretty good, and they were dancing close to DVD mainstream by the end of that. And so what I want to say to all those people saying, well, I got to have so many hours for teaching, is it's all age dependent. What was interesting is those early teenagers, they had a harder time than the teenagers. And the 20-somethings had a harder time. The 18 to 22s, that was easy. It was almost trivial. The under 18s learned fast, but didn't retain as much. This is my observation. So I'm sure there are exceptions to every one of these rules, everything I'm saying. But this is just observations. And the 22s and overs have begun to get the adult thinking pattern. They learn slower because they're thinking more spatially. So none of this is fixed. It's just some ideas. As you're calling to youth groups, after you've taught them, you have to be aware that if you're a site caller, you may be in serious trouble. Not because they won't do the calls right, but because somewhere in the middle they might change roles a dozen times, or squares, or anything is possible. So, be aware that if you're calling for youth, they're out there having fun. And now we try to teach the fact that if you're going to cut into a square, you have to do it smoothly. You have to make the person who was cut out be looking around for who they were going to be dancing with, because they're already gone. In other words, cutting has to be perfect. And you teach that. You actually teach cutting. If you break the square down in the course of cutting, because you cut in, that's a no-no. That is something that I actually teach, or I'm in the process of teaching. Because they want to have fun, but you also want to do it with some etiquette. And so thinking about that. The fact that they're going to cut in and out. The fact that they're going to change roles. That you have to be aware of as a caller. The other thing that I'm continually amazed at as I watch callers try to call to young people is that they are calling at the same pace. They may have speeded up the music, but they're still giving the same amount of extra time between calls. They're still sort of waiting for the dancer instead of just driving. You're headed down the highway. You're not clipping time. You're giving them no more than the number of beats necessary to do that call. They love it when you do that. They don't mind breaking down if it was their fault, but they do mind waiting. They don't want to be waiting there because. So, what is most exciting to them is to have a series of calls which are done precisely with the music, with the time, at least the group that I'm working with. And when they don't want clip time, but they don't want any extra time. It needs to be well timed. And when it is, they come out of it just sailing. And using good music that lets them sail, lets them do choreography, is strong, is driving music, helps a lot in that. And the more you keep the choreography interesting and exciting, you can't call swing through, boys run, bend the line every time, or they're going to start switching roles real fast. They're going to start doing things to make it exciting. If you do something different every time that's there, if you create the choreography that's exciting to them and is a little different, they don't switch roles. They do the dancing. They do the dancing you gave them because they're looking for challenge. Anyway, so in the handout, and I'll just quickly go over it for those of you who haven't seen most of this material, what draws youth to dancing is friendships, the high energy, the music. And the comment I made in the handout about music was, I have some dancers in this group that like old music as much as they like new music. Music has been stated for years as a scapegoat. You got to have current music. Well, that's true and false. They really like good old music. They really detest bad old music. They really dislike bad new music. All right? So it's really the quality of the music that's the issue. If you have good music with a good rhythm that lets them dance, they're going to really like it. The group that I just started, so far I haven't seen a skirt or a dress. I don't care. They show up in whatever they want to show up in, and we're dancing. And that's the way it's going to continue. Part of this group has been part of a performance team, and they'll have, and if we do any performance, they will have performance costumes. But they'll be, if they're going to wear dresses, they're floor length. They're double circle floor length. And if you know what and the girls love to wear them. They're just not going to go to every dance in them, every time into them. For the gentlemen who don't necessarily know what a double circle floor-length dress is as if you were standing here and you picked up both hems on either side and went this way. The front is still on the ground and the back is still on the ground. That's a double circle skirt. They like them because they flow. They flow out and flow around, and it's pretty, and they feel like ladies. It's really a neat thing to watch. And one of the things that the girls who see the younger people dance, when they dance in those dresses, the question is when can I dance in one of those? Which is absolutely a fascinating question. You look at it and say, well, they don't want to dance in dresses. Well, no, they don't want to dance in short dresses with short petticoats. They absolutely detest short petticoats and that concept. Okay, well, today's world. As a caller, the most important thing you have to have is an attitude that you're there to support them. You're there to help them, be enthusiastic and be upbeat. You have to be flexible because they're going to demand it, and you have to have a set of skills that are listed on the handout. So I won't go into this too much. Do you want to do questions for me first and then pass it on? All right. I think that's all I can. I was trying to think of other things that had come up. This youth group, I am actually forming this group so that someday I'm not calling for them. And you say, well, what do you mean? I want to finish up my part with this, and then we'll leave some questions for later. When I started dancing and calling in 1975, I was calling for a college group at Colorado State University. And the people that got me into it were other kids of my peer age. I was dancing with my peers. I was calling for my peers. And as a result of that, I was starting to think about 6 months ago, if I wanted to help a youth group get started, what would I do? And I said, well, to myself, I said, what I'd really like to do is find some kids who would make a youth group go, and that I could be a facilitator, a mentor, a helper. And so the core of this new group is some young people who want to do that. And one of the young ladies is a caller and is showing some real potential. She still needs mentoring. She needs to go to a couple of caller schools, and we need to do some more work. But she's showing real potential both in desire and in talent. So what I'm hoping to do with this group is get them to the point where they are running the events, they are calling the events. In fact, there's one tonight. I'm not going to be there. Well, one of those young people was bringing in somebody to help her, and this young lady, and they were going to have the dance tonight, even though I couldn't be there. That's ideal to me, because I think it's terribly important that young people dance with their peers and are led by their peers, and that those of us who are now in a couple of generations further on be there to support them. I made this comment to our Callers Association in Denver, and I said the most important thing you can do is be supportive and send them young people. They don't need you to go in and meddle. What they need you is to send them young people that are interested in dancing. And they need your support from the outside. And I'm trying to be the intermediary. I'm still calling too much. We've only had 4 tonight. Will be the 5th session. And I hope that by summer I may have gotten myself down to being there. That's sort of my objective. So this, along with a comment, I was at a club in Fort Collins in Colorado, and a lady came up to me and she says, how do you get young people to dance? And the first thing that came out of my mouth was a comment. I don't want this to sound rude, but don't make them dance with you. And that, along with the dancing with peers comment, is the most important thing I can tell you is we need to create forums for the youth of any of these age groups to dance with each other, not with us, at whatever age we are. And so I would encourage us as callers and in attempts to calling for youth to do both things, to recognize that we need them to be dancing with other youth, and 2, that youth, especially in that 18 to 30 range, they can easily lead their own groups and their own organizations and their own structures. I did it when I was that age, and I just realized that I did it when I was that age, and now I need to let them do it. And I think that's an important message I'd like to get across to that. Any quick questions, and we'll hopefully have time at the end for some more.
Tom Sellner from Maryland. When we were teenagers, the adults started a teen festival in the area, but they did it all wrong as far as we're concerned. So the following year, one of the gals took over. She was chairman. Another one of the teen callers programmed it. We had people coming from 4 states around, people as far away as New York were sending us notices. Not all of them showed up. But we had lots of people, and we wanted it to be our way. We didn't want it the way the teenagers wanted it.
Yep. That's an example.
Very good. I know myself, I do not have a youth group at home that I call for on a regular basis. But I do have a school program that I deal with kids, and we'll be talking about that tomorrow in calling in schools. But I do have the opportunity to go to a lot of the festivals. I know, like Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland, the Golden State Roundup. A lot of them have a youth. Yeah, and Reno as well. You know, so a lot of the festivals, so that when I'm calling, I engaged in the youth room and so forth. It's definitely a different style of calling. It's, you know, the energy level's here, and when you walk into the youth room, it's here. They are like sponges. They just get everything really quick. You can't walk in there and treat them like what's what you can't walk in there and treat them like you would everyday routine to per se normal dancers. These kids are looking for upbeat music. You don't want to go in there and do I don't know why I love you like that. They're not looking for songs like that. They're looking for fast-paced. They're moving. They want to be hit hard. They want to be challenged to the point where they walk away and they're like, they're huffing and puffing. Some of the things that you might see in a square is that they dance backwards. There's calls that they never drop hands, believe it or not. It's I think one of the neatest things I ever seen is when the four guys make a star. They're doing it like they're pushing a shopping cart, and they pause every 3 steps and reach up and look and put it in their cart, and they go around the star. I don't know where these kids come up with these things, but it's incredible to sit back and watch. You say boys trade, and they reverse trade, and you say boys run, and they run the opposite way. It's just incredible. And sometimes I get confused watching them, thinking, well, I didn't call it. Yeah, I did call that, or did I call that? Because of the way they execute the calls. But it's kind of neat to sit back and watch these kids. Yes, I think pretty much like Bob and myself, and I know Kristy, and we all started as youth dancers. I started dancing at the age of 14 about 21 years ago, 22 years ago. I was a math major. No, I started when I was 14, and of course I was calling by the time that I was 15. So I went through the lessons and automatically immediately right into calling. And by the time that I was 15, I had already been to a caller school, and so it happened that quick. In our area, when I first took my lessons, there was only 2 of us that started dancing. By the second year of dancing, we had 6 squares of kids that was dancing in the adult club because we just didn't have the nights and so forth. So we danced in the adult club, and we really didn't mix with the adults until we kind of got older and so forth, and all of a sudden you'd see the mixing of adults because now the adults wanted to come and play with us. They wanted to get that style of dancing, so there was that mix, and that was kind of a neat thing to see, that mix between the adult dancers to the kids. When I do the Waska Festival, and I do Hunt Valley, and I go out to the West Coast, and I know Illinois State Convention has a youth hall, I always try to find out if I'm scheduled in there because I know I got to prepare myself differently. I actually got to, mentally get prepared to do that particular session. Just because it's such a high profile hour that I may have, or 2 hours. And you walk away and you're exhausted just because of how they present themselves. And I'm sure Scott can agree with that, and Bob can agree with it. It's a tiresome, event when you're calling for these kids just because of the way that they present themselves in the square. It's kind of neat. I know I've known Kristy since she was knee-high and dancing in the youth hall at Waska and so forth, and it's kind of neat to watch these kids grow up and wearing the attire and watch how they twirl, and they want to see all the garments swaying back and forth, and the running and the can style type thing, as you call it. These kids are just having a good time. I have never seen the double circle dress. I've never seen that. I've seen pictures, I guess, back in the days, but I couldn't imagine someone driving a car with one of those. Kid, how would that work? Airbag. But anyway, just a quick question, show of hands. How many people here call for a youth group on a regular basis? Okay. How many calls for youth, like if they do weekends? Okay. How many people calls in schools? Okay. How about youth groups? Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts. Okay. It's you'll find that it's a different avenue every direction that you take, whether it's for the schools, whether it's for a youth group, whether it's for a church group, because all these kids have their own different kind of personalities. And it's our job as a square dance caller, especially if they're new and they've never square danced before, to present them with the image of what square dancing should be and not what the image that they do have. I mean, you ask any of the kids, when I go into the high schools and I ask what the kids is, give me the image of square dancing, the first thing I hear is fiddle, barn, and hay. You know, and I come right back to them and say, hey, you're wrong. You know, because our image that these kids need to see is an image of, it is a puzzle. It is a live video game. It's a game, and it's a video game that we're putting out to these people, and they got to solve the puzzle. And personalities that these kids have, you'll get some that's shy, that won't hold hands. Well, there's ways that you can get around that and work with them and so forth. You know, I just say, everybody don't join hands and circle left. Since you don't want to hold hands, we'll just do everything without hands. But you're playing games with them. You're playing games, and eventually what happens is they realize that there's nothing wrong with taking hands, and they do that. Any questions? Oh, microphone. Microphone.
Yonacha, Hawaii. When you get them in the upper teens, it's not holding hands, it's getting them to let go and change partners.
Okay, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Kristy Jacobs.
Hello, thank you. Well, I am learning how to call, but mostly, you know, for the past well over 10 years, I don't even know when I started dancing, I have been a dancer and a youth dancer, and I still, at 24 years old, consider myself a youth dancer. And yes, I'll go out and dance with adults, and that's fine, and I have a good time doing that too. But at the heart, I'm still a youth dancer, and my friends are still youth dancers, and we still dance together, and we still dance in youth halls. And we're very involved in the youth halls in our area at the Wasca Festival, like Tommy was talking about. And at Hunt Valley, we have a Young at Heart Hall, and we're very involved in running those. I'm part of a youth club in Maryland called the Ragamuffins, and we're also very involved in that. In fact, the whole club is run by the youth, and our caller, Bruce Mitchell, considers himself our employee. And all the decisions that are made by the dancers. Everything that gets done because the dancers put in the work and the effort. So what I really want to do is just kind of give you an idea of the youth's perspective, what they're looking for, what they need, and what they want. Youth square dancing doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's still square dancing, and there's still square dancers. It's not a completely different entity, but it is a very different audience that you're calling for. And just as you wouldn't go and call for a group of seniors the way that you would call for a group of 40 and 50-year-olds, you're not going to call for youth dancers in the same way. And the success of your dances for your youth dancers, it depends on the choices that you make. And to be able to make good choices, you have to have the knowledge of what they want and what they need. There's also a difference between what youth dancers think that they want and what they actually want. There's times when they don't know. There's certain things that they know what kind of music they like. But then there are things that you can do that will contribute to their good time that they don't even realize that you're doing. So what I really want to do is just give you an idea of what youth dancers are looking for so that then you have the knowledge to make the right choices. And as Tom and Bob were talking about, it's very different when you're calling for younger children as opposed to teens or college-age children. Those are very different groups. If you're calling for a youth club, that's very different than calling in a youth hall. Each audience is very different. So the first thing that you want to be aware of is who you're calling for. And if it's younger kids, then you're going to call in a completely different way than you might if it's mostly teen kids on the floor. The most important, square dancing is a social aspect for everyone, or a social activity for everyone. There's a lot of social aspect about it that's very important, and even more so for youth dancers. They are there, the main reason they're there is to dance with their friends. It's really not to hear you call. It's to be with their friends and have a good time. Dancing sometimes is almost an afterthought. Like they'd have fun if they were just in a hall hanging out with their friends. Now, if you're calling a good dance and they're excited to get up there and dance with their friends, and if you're calling things that they're not as excited about, you're going to lose some of them. And if you're at a youth hall, you'll find them out in the hallway socializing instead of in the hall dancing. So the choices that we make determine whether or not they're going to be in there dancing or out in the hallway goofing around. So we want to make the right choices so we can keep them on the floor as opposed to running around with their friends. The friendships and relationships that they build are the number one thing that are going to keep them coming back to dances. So we also have to allow time for them to build these relationships and for them to have the social aspect. So I always suggest that you allow a little extra time in between tips for them to sort of socialize and talk and hang out, and then you don't deal with the problem of you put the music on and they don't seem to want to square up. One of the most important things that a caller can do is to interact. Young people want attention. There's a lot of adults who want attention too. But young people especially, they crave attention, and if you give it to them, you're making leaps and bounds with them right there. A positive attitude is really important from the moment that you walk in the door. They don't care if you've had a bad day and you don't want to be there. The second that you walk into the hall, you better act like you want to be there whether you do or you don't. Positive attitude is very important. Interaction is very important. Make sure that you get out and talk to the dancers and really interact. And if they feel like you care, then they're going to care more about you, and they're going to want to dance to you more. And they can tell when it's genuine and when it's not. And I always encourage, not everyone's a comedian, but it's always a lot of fun for the dancers if you can make comments while you're on stage, while you're calling, joking around, interacting with them while you're on stage as well as while you're off. That'll just, it's something that they really enjoy. It's not necessary if you're not comfortable with it, but it's something that helps. You do have to be patient and flexible because things are not always going to go the way you planned. And like Tommy talked about, we do all sorts of crazy things. I don't know how you know what you're calling when you're calling for us. There's crazy things going on all the time, and you have to be able to deal with that and go with that. And occasionally there will be behavioral problems, and you have to be able to deal with that too. And you have to be compassionate and sensitive because they are young and they can be very easily hurt and embarrassed. And the worst thing that you can do is to scold someone from the stage. They're embarrassed, you're embarrassing them in front of their friends, and they're not going to come back, and you've just lost a dancer. So if there are behavioral problems, you can take them aside and talk to them calmly and politely and genuinely, one-on-one, and work out whatever the issue is. And you have to remember that they are still young, and they're going to screw up sometimes, and that's okay. We want them to be having fun and to be successful in the long run. It's very important to have a lot of variety. Youth dancers, especially the younger kids, get bored easily and they have short attention spans. If you see them start to if you see them starting to anticipate calls, if they seem to be losing focus, then you need to rethink what you're doing and think about what you can do differently. I work at a daycare, and I know if I'm teaching my children something, and you can start, you know when they're slipping, when they're losing focus, when they're kind of reaching their limits of where they can pay attention. And if you can recognize that okay, they're losing it and I'm not going to have them for much longer, and you can either switch and do something completely different that grabs their attention again, or just give them a break so they can rest their brains, then you still have control. But if they're starting to, if their attention is waning and you keep pushing and pushing and pushing because you want to get your point across, you're going to lose them completely, and then there's no coming back. So if you keep pushing and pushing and pushing to the point where there's nothing left for them, they're going to start failing, squares are going to break down, and then you're ending a tip without them being successful, which is the last thing you want. You want to end on a good note. So if you see anticipation starting to happen, you see them losing their concentration, you want to either do something completely different, get them through that successfully and stop, or just stop where you are. Take a break, let them rest, let them socialize, and then come back and do some more. As far as choreography, I think it's really important to challenge them. Really, really important. There's no need to ever call down to youth dancers. They're capable of so much. They really are like sponges. They can suck in so much information, and they're capable of all sorts of things. I really like it when callers call DBD for youth dancers. I think it's a great way to keep them thinking and keep them improving, and it really keeps them on their toes and keeps the attention there. At the same time, you do have to take into account their age and their level of experience. So you should challenge them, but not too hard, because we still want them to be successful. So DBD, workshopping calls that they're having a hard time with. If they're having a hard time with the call, don't just stop calling it. We want them to be good dancers. So take the time to run them through it, tell them what they're doing wrong, and teach them the call. Creative choreography, anything just to keep them involved so they don't lose their focus, because that leads to sloppy dancing. And as soon as youth dancers start getting bored in the square, they're going to come up with their own ways to entertain themselves. And that's when the really bad goofing off starts, and then you've completely lost them. It's just Are you bored, Tommy? I forgot what I was saying now. So you have to keep them right there, focused, paying attention, and you can do that with your choreography, keeping it interesting. You know, people I know I've heard Tommy do this, but it gets really boring when you hear the same figures over and over and over again. No, I'm leading up to what you do. That's not what you do. When every figure starts with head square through 4, it gets really old. And our group especially, when we keep hearing that over and over and over again, we'll just skip the whole thing and pair off, go face our corners. Now, there's callers like Tommy, who's wonderful, who will say head square through, we'll go in and face our corners, and then he'll say 2 hands, just to keep you on your toes. You've done that. You have done that. You have done that.
I have.
So, and then that's the kind of thing that you need to do, anything to bring the focus back to, you know, and now they know, okay, I have to listen now. He's not going to just let me slide. Yes, go ahead.
What Kristy was talking about, the squaring through. You're going to hear one of my secrets. One of the things that I like doing with the youth is when I call for the youth at Waska and Hunt Valley and so forth and places like that, is that I do very boring things because I want them to start being creative so I can play games with them, like the square through 2. Or if I say like swing through, and I'll say boys, and they'll start running, I'll say circulate. You know, so I'll play with these kids because now, exactly. You know, but the thing of it is,
it's on our toes.
But the thing of it, exactly what it does, and when I know that when I do it, I'm speaking from my perspective, is when I call and I play little head games like the head square through, and they pair off, and I say 2, or I say swing through boys, trade. it's kind of neat when I go back the next time and say head square through, they're executing the square through. Or if I say swing through boys, they don't move until they hear the word run, trade. And it's just really kind of neat to watch that. And then I'll go back the third time and do some different stuff, and I'll come right back and revisit and then change it completely again. So it's constantly keeping these kids on their toes, and because now they know I'm playing a game with them. And then all of a sudden, at the singing call or the patter part, you'll see a little congregation together before the singing call of what they're going to do next in their singing call. So now I've got to figure out what they have done in their what they're going to do. So now they're keeping me on my toes. And this is the kind of the repetition that you have to keep up with the kids and so forth. Kristy can tell you this. I know Tom has peeked into the hall, and several other people is that I'm always communicating with the kids from the microphone. When I'm calling, I'm constantly picking on them and playing games with them, and I think that's important to do. And even when the square is over, I am out with the dancers and out with the kids. And if they have a kids after party, okay, it's a pizza party. I go for a slice of pizza. All right. I'm not going to lie to you. Okay. I think that I think with building that one-on-one with each one of those kids, it means a lot down the road. I know for a fact that the kids know exactly what caller they can pick on and what callers they cannot pick on. It's a very visual thing that when callers calling for youth, you know exactly if that caller wants to be there or if that caller doesn't want to be there. And the youth people will let you know that, you know what, they didn't have a good time with that particular caller. They did not have a good time. Okay? They'll let you know. You know, I hope they never put that caller back in this hour. You've heard that. You've heard that, and I'm sure you've heard that. You know, you've said that, yeah. And the reason being is because it's not because the caller wasn't talented. It's that the caller himself wasn't having a good time. And the kids feel, and they take that responsibility that, well, he didn't have a good time. He didn't like being here, you know, and we've tried everything. We did everything that we could to get him to respond, and he didn't respond, you know. So these kids will let you know who they like and who they don't like. I know that the Waska kids, the Baltimore kids, they have their favorites, and if they go to a weekend and there's somebody that is on that staff not scheduled into that youth program prior to the weekend, or if they find out when they get there and there's a caller that's there that hasn't been scheduled that they like, these kids will just congregate all together and go right to the committee and say, hey, you know, Tom Miller was not scheduled to call for us at all this weekend, and we want him scheduled in that hall, or whoever it may be. And believe it or not, these little brats get what they want. You know, they'll get the caller that they want. And I'm like, I don't want to call for you guys. I don't, just leave it the way it is. You know, of course I'm playing with them again, but I love calling for the youth, and it's just because I started as a youth, and now I got a 12-year-old, a soon-to-be 12-year-old daughter. Chi-Chi there in the back met my daughter a few weeks ago, and she dances with my adult groups at home. And I hear all the things. Well, that was fun, but I wish there was more kids my age. And I now put a challenge on my daughter's lap. If she gets kids that wants to square dance, I'll be more than happy to call for them. And I think it's going to happen. She is soon to be 12 years old, and she has never had any square dance lessons whatsoever. none whatsoever, because the clubs in our area does not let kids come in under the age of 14 or whatever that might be. So with her coming to square dancing and sitting back and watching, she has taught herself basically how to dance all the way through the A2 program. And her reading a book is sitting down and reading the definitions of square dance calls. And she says, Dad, I think I might be a square dance caller. I said, oh, no. You appreciate the youth side of square dancing. So, and again, Chi-Chi will say, tell you that she's a pretty good dancer, and I don't have anything to do with it other than I can't say I taught her, because I haven't. But just with hearing what she has to say about square dancing is, she likes to dance with the adults, but she wishes that she had kids her age so she could carry on. And she really, I talk about the youth all the time, and she's like, well, Dad, I want to go to Wasca. I want to go to Hunt Valley. When you got to California and call again, I want to go out there, because you always talk about the youth and the whole bit. And so, yeah, because I talk about the youth. I talk about the youth all the time, because I think it's important. Of course, with my daughter being in square dancing, I think that she needs to hear that to kind of get her out of that little rut about she thinks there's nothing but adults in square dancing, because that's all she sees in her area. She's the only basically kid that dances in our area. So other than the kids that's in high school, of course, and her school that I go teaching at, but it's just kind of neat to sit back, and she'll say, well, I like this singing call, but I like the patter. And maybe the next tip, she'll come up to me afterwards and say, well, Dad, I like the patter, but the singing call, yuck. She goes, kiss me once and kiss me twice and kiss me once again. She's like, what's that all about? Yeah, she's 12. Yeah. So, but so, and then of course, I do, something from the radio that she's listening to, then she thinks that's pretty neat to be dancing to Kenny Chesney's song or whatever it might be. But the kids deserve, and deserve's not the word I'm looking for. Kids need that little bit of extra attention. Just like Chrissy said, they're kids, they're teenagers, the emotions are running, and yes, every one of us who has called for groups have had a hard time getting kids up onto the floor, because there's a 17 or an 18-year-old along the sideline that has made a new friend, and they want to build that little friendship better than what it can be. So it's hard for them to get up and get into a square and go dance with somebody else. It takes time, for sometimes to get kids on the floor, and it gets frustrating at times. But they're kids. I mean, I know at home when I ask my kids to do something, it might take 4 or 5 times, and then I got to say to my wife, honey, can you please, no, I'm just kidding. No. No, but it might take 4 or 5 times before these kids get up off their chair and go do what I ask them to do for Daddy. Well, it's the same way in the youth. You might have to coax this kid 4 or 5 times to get them from the sideline to get in a square. Most of the time, the kids are ready and they're ready to go. Most of the time, they're on the floor. But there's a couple of times that you have to sit and coax, and that's all part of it. And patience. Patience is really important to have working with kids in a youth group. Chrissy, go ahead and finish. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
And if they don't get up to dance immediately, it doesn't mean that they don't want to be there or they're not having fun. But there's other things going on, and then there's other things, that their attention is focused on. Yes, Scott.
Actually, what I wanted to say was my situation is different. Scott Byers, I'm from Sacramento, California. My situation is quite a bit different in the fact that all of my kids are part of adult clubs. At first, at a lot of times, they didn't know how to have fun, so I had to teach them. I had to teach them how to kick, how to spin, how to cut people out, how to, how to do that, how to lift people off the ground and that kind of stuff. So I had to do that, jump and run. So I basically had to teach them to do that, but I consider calling always on the edge when I'm calling for the kids. I'm just on the edge of control. You know what I'm saying? You're right. You're on the fence, and if you step this way, you're completely out of control, and you don't want to step too far that way. You don't want to have too much control because they don't like to have control. So so that's how I feel about it when I'm calling. I'm just lucky that my energy level is enough that I can do the classes that I do, and I do those kind of classes all the time. When you're talking about 10-hour classes, I put my kids through blast classes all the time. And like your daughter, we call that dancing by fire. They'll bring their friends in, and they'll drag them through a square, and in 3 months they're dancing full plus. I have got about a square of kids now dancing C1 through blast classes. I'll teach, I'll teach mainstream in 2 6-hour classes. I'll teach plus in 1 6-hour class, A1 in a 6-hour class, A2 in a 6-hour class, and C1 in now 3 6-hour classes. So I teach them all by blast classes, or they learn by fire. They don't have classes. They just get in and do it. So that's...
And I have to agree with Scott because, again, tomorrow's a program on calling in schools. The schools that I teach at, I have each class 4 periods at 84-minute periods. The first week, the first 2 periods, they get through everything all the way through mainstream. And those 2 84-minute periods. So for 6 hours of teaching a program like that I wouldn't think it would be any questionable. I think there would be no question there whatsoever because I know it's being done, and because again the kids, depending on their age, are they're just going to eat all that up. In a 6-hour course of doing mainstream, I'm doing 2 84 sessions and getting all the way through, 60, 61, whatever, 50, 59, 61, whatever that might be, all the way through Ferris wheel. So I know that it can be done. The second week we do at school is just putting in all the different positions and doing singing calls. The last 2 times that they dance is just doing all the different stuff with them. And I know with Scott, I've seen Scott's dancers, and they are tremendous dancers. I mean, they're a ball of fire. There ain't no doubt about it. And but my question to Scott is do you think you can show me how you pick a person up? Can you demonstrate with me picking up? Sure. Yeah, right. Yeah.
If I might have a little disagreement here, one of the things that I'm pretty emphatic about is that there are certain kinds of lifts and twirls that belong in square dancing. There are certain of the things that I don't think are necessary to have fun. And I don't know exactly what you're talking about, Scott, but I visualize some things that maybe I probably would not encourage by the way you describe it. I think we can have fun with good timing, good choreography, good challenging choreography, and good flow and good music. And yes, going around, the average swing of a teenager doing a good buzz step swing is 4 or 5 times around, if done right. Well, I mean, in the time that everyone else is doing 1 time around. In that timeline. I guess the point being is if you're doing a good flowing buzz step swing and they've been taught to do it and they've been taught how to dance smoothly, and I have no idea what your dancers' capabilities are, and you're obviously a great teacher, but I would caution people to interpret what Scott is saying is that we need to be teaching quality dancing and good dancing along with having a great time. And I can't judge any of them because I don't know your dancers and I don't know what you do personally. But I just want to make that a little bit of a caution.
I lie a lot. Just one quick comment. The youth dancers will pick up bad habits just like the adult dancers pick up bad habits. I have seen that, and I'll go down to you. Where'd you learn that? Oh, we saw the adults do it. You know, we saw them high kicking and bumping and so forth. You're going to see that, and bad habits are sometimes habits that especially kids can't break. I think teaching them bad habits is a completely different side of the coin. And I don't think any of us would teach bad habits to the degree to where they would physically or mentally hurt anybody. I just think leave it to the wayside, because they're going to learn the bad habits anyway, without a doubt.
Hi, I'm Erin. I'm Scott's wife. And
So you his wife?
I
thought you was his daughter. I'm sorry.
Gee, thanks. Yeah. I very much want to hear the rest of Kristy's presentation, but I just wanted to interject very quickly. One of the things that we found, realize that almost all our kids dance with adult groups. So there are times during every evening when they're in a square with adults, which means they have to dance straight. Okay? So one of the things we've discovered is if they're in a square with just kids and we let them screw around and be silly, and the two boys are dancing together and they're swinging and twirling each other like about to break their arms or whatever, then they're going to turn around the next square and go dance with the adults and be straight and perfect and little ladies and gentlemen. Okay? We know that they need to act up a little bit. And if we let them act up a little bit, then they're going to turn around and be wonderful when we need them to be. Okay? We give them that leeway. The kids that travel with us to dance, they have a rule. You be on the floor half the night. I don't care if it's squares, rounds, whatever it is, but you be squared up half the night. And sometimes they'll come to me the last tip and they'll go, I couldn't get in a square. Can I dance Phantom? And it still counts. You know? But they know that they have to come to dance. The other one thing that I wanted to mention just quickly, I've been dancing since I was 13. And the kids that we have dancing with us now, when they go to a festival, they go around and find every other young person on that festival grounds, whether they know them or not, and say, come on, you're part of our group. And they include every... We never did that. We were selfish and horrible and exclusive. But these kids are not. And I've even heard them say, you know, I don't like that person very much. But if they're out at a festival, they include every single person in their group. And I'm so proud of them every time. And, yeah, it's amazing.
Sure. Okay, you already asked the question. Your question
Did I
is,
ask
can I
the
ask
question?
the question?
Ask the question, yes.
Okay.
My name is Terry Lewis. And when you have a group pairing off instead of squaring through four, for instance, does everybody do that, or do you hold your choreography back to accommodate people that are just facing their corner?
Everybody does not do that.
Okay, so your dancing is fairly choppy for some people and not for others?
You call for the people that are executing the calls properly.
Right. And have you ever considered a definition to accommodate what they're doing as a youth group? You know what I mean? There is one. Fun or something? What, no. Like if you're squaring through...
What they're doing is called pair off.
No, I say something else like squaring through four without dropping hands or something like that.
You wouldn't call that, but that becomes part of the character of the dance. And recognize that it is not as much fun if you're telling them. That's why they're doing it.
Okay.
And that.
So once you define it as not fun.
And that is not changing the choreography. If they're doing the hand thing, they're doing this call in the time that it was allowed to be used in, and they're having fun doing that. That's just different styling, and there's lots of different styling out there. That's just one of them.
Before calling to youth, what would you recommend for a person to do before a person would do such a thing? Like, would you come and watch?
Go watch Tommy call a youth dance. That's probably, because one of the things you're going to have to see is what happens, how he responds to it, the pace he calls at, the music he uses. There are 10 to 20 things that he uses that I use that are going to be different than what you use for an adult group. And watching somebody do that, engineer their way through this maze, which is, you could plan it, but you better be ready to change it on the fly because it's going to change.
In other words, go pick up that person's bad habits. Learn from the bad habits. Because, like I said, it's a different style of square dancing. I would recommend if anybody was to go and start a youth group, I would say take the time and find somebody that has a youth group and so forth, and go from there.
Yona Chalk from Hawaii. I used to call for a family group in Italy. We had one square of kids of assorted sizes. We had a sight caller come in to call at our club as a guest, and he started to sight on the kids who squared up right in front of him. I said, don't do that. Pick another square. And he said, no, I can handle it. I said, don't do that. This is my club. I'm telling you, don't sight a kid square. They changed partners, sexes, and squares in 3 calls, and he just stood there going, bah. So it's something you need to be aware of. If you are a sight caller, it's not going to work with kids.
And the last thing you want to do is turn any part of your back onto these kids when they're in the squares dancing. Because let me tell you something, that you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know if you're going to be wrapped in toilet paper. You don't know if you're going to be bombarded with ping pong balls. You don't know if you're going to be having styrofoam frisbees thrown at you. Duct tape. Yeah. You don't know, so you need to keep, you need to have eyes all over the place, but don't ever turn your back on these kids one time, because they're I'm going to let Kristy finish, so. Okay.
We keep interrupting.
Okay, time's up.
I want to comment about a couple of the things that got talked about. First, Aaron said exactly what I was going to say. We always learn that there is one way that we dance when we dance with youth, and then there's another way that we dance when we dance with adults. So we can goof off and do whatever we want when we're dancing in a square of youth, but we know as soon as we go into a hall and dance with adults that stops. Our boys do the backwards trade, do it all the time, and if you try to do that with an adult dancer, you'd probably hurt somebody. Like it's so they know they don't do that with adults. So there's one way to dance, and I think the kicking and the flourishes and that's all great when it's in that setting with all people who know what's going on, who aren't going to be completely thrown off by it. Yeah, I thought you were going to say something. And then back to what Tommy was talking about a while ago about joking around and with the kids while you're on the stage and everything. I was thinking about this morning when I was thinking about the panel, I was kind of thinking about my favorite caller when I was younger and what were the things that I liked about him when I was 13, 14 years old. What were the things that made him my favorite caller, and then what are the things now that I like about that caller. I'll tell you, my favorite caller has always been Tom Miller. So, no, don't tell my dad. It's true. But anyway, that's enough. When I was 13 and 14, thanks. When I was 13 and 14, if you asked me why Tommy was my favorite caller, I would have said because he's fun, because he's funny, because he talks to me, he jokes around with me, he knows my name, and he knows things about my life, and not just because he knows my father, he knew about all of us in my group. And, you know, there's a whole bunch of people who share my feelings about Tommy in our group and in our area. And those were the reasons why I liked him then. If I think about why I like his calling now, I might think about some more technical things that I had never thought about at that age. I might think about the music that he uses or the choreography he uses. But I still think about the interaction that I have with him when he calls. That you always feel like he's connected to the dancers and he's right there with you, and it's not him on stage and you on the floor and you're kind of doing your own things and you're listening to him. There's this constant interaction, there's this constant back and forth, and you feel like there's a connection. So that's the one thing that I think is universal as youth dancers grow up, no matter where they are, no matter what environment you're dancing in, whether it's a youth hall or a youth club. That's the one thing, not the one thing, but one of the main things that always stays constant is that they want that interaction and they want that feeling of connection between the caller and the dancers. We talked about music a little bit, and I pretty much agree with everything that was said. The main things are just a strong beat, kind of that driving force, a strong, steady beat, and variety. And you don't have to play a popular song from the radio every time. They like that, but what they really want is a variety. And youth dancers, again, will get bored with the same thing over and over and over again. So you want to show them a whole spectrum of different styles and different songs, and you also want to stay within your comfort range. So if they have a favorite singing call that's completely, you know, not something that you normally do, then don't do it. It might be their favorite singing call, but if you can't really perform it to their expectations, then you shouldn't do it at all. That's the main thing with music is just to have a variety, to keep it interesting, to keep it always different, and to have the strong beat, which is important, you know, I think when you call anywhere. And there's a lot more in the handout that you can read, but I have a couple things. Mostly it applies to youth club callers, but I think that it's really important within your youth club. It's a really different animal than calling in a youth hall. You know the dancers more, you know exactly what they like, you have experience with them, you have a relationship with them. We have a relationship with Tommy because he calls for us consistently, but let's say you just go in to call a couple tips at the national convention, you know, for the youth, or you're calling at a festival for a first time in the youth hall, and you don't really have that relationship and you don't really know each other. You can't kind of do some of the things that you can do when you have that relationship and you really know the dancers. So with youth clubs, there's really a lot of room to help them grow as dancers and as leaders. So you're making sure that they're having a good time and they're getting the social aspects and the recreation and the entertainment, but they're also learning things without really knowing that they're learning them. We learn leadership skills because, like I said before, we're involved in all the running of the club. And I really believe that it's the youth dancers that are going to be the leaders in square dancing, you know, 20 years from now. The people... So if you let them really be involved in what's going on, they learn that leadership early on, and they learn that you have to put in the work to be able to have the experiences that you want. When we plan special events, we know that if we don't work at it, it's not going to happen. So you can really help them learn those leadership skills. You can be there to kind of advise them, but let them figure things out for themselves and let them do what they want. And if they have a crazy idea and you think that might not work, well, let them try. And then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But let them experiment and see what they can do. You can also, you really have an opportunity to make them much stronger dancers, which is important because a lot of youth dancers, when they kind of reach the point where they're no longer youth dancers and they're going to go out and dance in the adult world, you lose a lot of dancers at that point. And they're not quite ready, you know, with their abilities to go dance with adult dancers, or there's kind of an attitude that adult dancers have about them, so they're not really welcomed into the adult dance world. And you can really help to ease that transition if you, A, teach them the leadership skills like I talked about, and B, teach them to be better dancers. Back to the DBD like I was talking about before, which I think is important, and workshopping calls and really challenging them and keeping them thinking. I think it's important that they can do calls from different positions that they wouldn't normally think of. You can really help them be stronger dancers, which is going to help them stay with square dancing for a longer period of time. With your youth clubs, again, the social aspect of it is really important. So we do a lot of outside activities, barbecues, go to bowling, go to the park, and, you know, run around to try to give them place to build the relationships and really build the bonds, and that's going to keep them more connected to each other and to the club and to the activity. The stronger the bonds are to each other, the stronger their bonds are to the activity. So I think it's a great way to give them an opportunity to build those bonds. You always want to keep things fun. So we do lots of things like dangle dances, and we were at a weekend once, and we just decided we were going to see how many dangles we could get through the weekend. So we did everything. We went across the street to the McDonald's and danced in the McDonald's, went down the road and danced in the Friendlies, danced in the pool, danced in the elevator, danced on a bed, danced in a bathroom, just did all over the hotel, everywhere we could, just danced everywhere and got all these dangles. And it's a ton of fun. Anything that's exciting and out of the norm, anything that's not just the normal thing will get them really excited and really interested. We love to do Arky a lot. Well, the guys love to dance the girls' part, period, all the time. And you'll often see we have two guys square up together, and just for fun. And of course, the girls, right? You're lucky if you have a club where you have, you know, enough boys that all the girls can dance the girls' part. But I know in our area, I'm dancing the boys' part a lot. So that's another reason why we need to have stronger dancing skills. If you're going to have to go back and forth from both parts, let's really teach them how to do that. Let's make sure that they're doing it right. So those are two ideas for that. And again, you want to teach them to care about their image. We go to adult clubs a lot, and we know there's one way to act in our youth club and there's another way to act in our adult club, and we care about how we look to the adult dancers. And I think that's really important. And I think
Tom Selner from Maryland, and well, I agree with nearly everything that she had to say, and most of you said. I started out in the 11th grade to dance, but my wife started out in the 8th grade as a very small. And when they went to the festival, they were only allowed to dance on Saturday morning for 2 hours, and then they were forced to go home. Our group in '63 was the first time at Waska they let teenagers dance the whole time. So we had a curve to go against. And also, when my wife started at 8, by the time they were 12 years old, they were representing their clubs at Waska, and they would stand up and talk to the adults and say what they thought. Of course, the adults often said, "Sit down, we don't want to listen to you, you know, you don't know what you're talking about, you're kids." That happens. But we are building leaders, so much so that my wife was the one. She wasn't my wife then, but she was a teenager who ran the teen festival the second year, totally, made a total program. Her and three others, made a wonderful festival for the teens, and it goes. The other thing is, I think some of you are scaring callers to call for teens a little bit by what you're saying. And I'll tell you this, if you teach a group of dancers, I don't care what age they are, they will dance what you teach them. So you don't have to be afraid to call for teens. And teens don't misbehave as much as some people say they do, although it appears that way sometimes. Because we danced, you know, everything. The only time that we did things is we were waiting. We hated to wait for the next call. So any caller who came in had terrible timing or too many words between. That's when we messed up. Otherwise, we wanted to dance. We danced to Les Gocher. Was at the time the hardest caller to dance to. And the only two squares that were often left at Waska were one square at Star Squares and one squares in Twirler and W. Those two teen squares were the only ones dancing on the floor at Waska very often because Les Gocher was that hard. So, but most of all, don't be afraid to call for teens. And they will behave. You know, what you expect for them to do, they'll do. And you can latitude and let them play and whatever, but you can control the floor too. You can keep it from being, you know, too crazy by how you call. If you get up there and you call, you know, not so good timing, whatever, they're going to mess up. You call good choreography and keep them dancing, they're not going to have time to mess around. They're going to dance. And not only that, very often the teens, you know, they do learn fast, but they don't learn everything fast. They learn everything at first for the first 3 weeks. After that, it kind of slows down because they got so much in their minds. I know that when I was learning, we only learned 5 lessons. But when I got to wheel and deal, I had trouble as a teenager learning wheel and deal quickly because it presented a challenge. So don't get the idea that if you teach them everything at once, you have to. You don't have to do that. You just have to keep them interested like any other dancer. So I mostly want to say is call for teens. Don't be afraid of them. You can control the dance. If you're a caller and you're knowledgeable in what you're doing, you'll be able to do the dance you want to do. You don't have to be afraid.
Commentary on that a little bit. The kids, you're right, they'll dance what you call, and they'll take your leadership. At some point, I think that as they get older, and I think the point that I was trying to make earlier is, at some point they take leadership, and you indicated that as well. I think there's a misperception at multiple levels. There's a misperception of the abilities. That adults tend to think, well, they can't do it. Well, there are certain developmental areas where at certain ages there are things they can't do. And this came really crystal clear to me. We were doing a performance group where we were putting 16 people in a square, the royal set, the double square. And the high school juniors, seniors, and college kids were gobbling it up. They loved it. The middle school kids were just lost. They weren't developmentally ready for that kind of thing. They weren't interested in it. They could do it, but they weren't interested in it. And it was when I looked at the 3 or 4 kids who were in that group, I went, this is interesting. And we quit doing it with that particular age group. And I think we have to be aware that there are developmental characteristics of all young people. And there are exceptions to every one of the rules that you might establish with those developmental characteristics. But in general, there are certain things that you can say about each age group. And it's particularly true the younger they are, the under 8s. Because that developmental curve is so tremendous. Above that, there's still some developmental characteristics that are a lot more subtle. Leadership is extremely important, and we should be encouraging all young people to take leadership roles. And the most important thing, we as adults, because many of them are all adults too, according to the modern world, those of us who are older, let me say that, we should not be limiting them or tromping on them, so to speak. We should allow them to lead and give guidance. I do a lot of question asking in trying to provide guidance, trying to say, have you thought about this or this, as a means to communicate that maybe they ought to think about it differently.
No, I think we're okay. Anybody have any questions? No questions at all? Any comments? All right.
Good morning.
Well, we appreciate you coming by. Thank you very much. Nice hand to Bob Briggs. Kristy Jacobs. Very good. Listen, before we go, Kristy is compiling names for youth-friendly callers that's willing to work with the youth, calling for the youth, whether it's clubs you call for or festivals, weekends. Make sure you see Kristy and give your name, address, and emails and so forth. We're going to compile that and put it into a database and so forth, and just kind of keep that on hand, and we know. And
I have a beginning list of youth callers as well. And so if there are youth callers that are not here and you might think we might not know about, we're trying to find out who out there are serious youth callers who really want to do this in some way, and getting their names to us would be very useful as well.
Very good. Have yourself a good afternoon, and thank you for participating. Have a great one.